Happy solstice. See, we have some participants showing up. We'll give a minute for folks to join. So while we're at it, let us know in the chat, what's your favorite recent nature sighting? It could be from Mount Tamalpais, your own backyard, your neighborhood, a recent trip. You can just put those in the chat while we wait for others to join. No one's seen anything? You must have seen something. Ah, pair of bald eagles. Nice. Nice. Mariposa lilies. Elk passing through the Rocky Mountains on Amtrak, while on Amtrak. Great. Okay. I think we're going to get started. It is 6:33, and I think we have like maybe half of the audience here, but we're going to get started because we have so much to share with you today. So welcome. We're excited to talk to you tonight about peak health, which is what we're calling the big effort on behalf of the One Tam partners to help us understand and protect the health of Mount Tamalpais. You may know that we recently released an updated report on the status of the mountain's ecosystems. Nice to see those sightings still coming in there. But this is a story about more than a report. It's about how we come together and use science to answer the big picture questions. It's about what we can say about what's happening on the landscape, and it's about where we need to learn more. We're in a time of change, so it's important to keep a pulse on the mountain in order to be good stewards of Mount Tamalpais. And as usual, there are ways you can get involved and support. So I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Yolanda Molette, and I'm the Director of Conservation and Community Science at the Parks Conservancy. And I'm going to be your narrator tonight as we move through. Okay. So I'm joined by my colleagues tonight, and they're going to help us tell this story. And let's look at how we're going to shape it. So first, we're going to open things up with a few welcoming words from Claire Mooney, our Vice President of Park Projects and Conservation from Parks Conservancy. We're going to answer that question, is Mount Tam at peak health? And talk about the big picture results of our recently released report as told by Bree Hardcastle from California State Parks and myself. We'll talk about how we're thinking about ecological health in light of climate change, narrated by Henifin from Pepperwood Preserve. And we'll get to hear about an update about our forest health work, which grew out of and is connected to the peak health work. And that'll be told by Franco from the Parks Conservancy. We'll end with how you can get involved in stewardship and support in the mountain with Rebecca Lizarraga from Parks Conservancy. And lastly, we'll also have time for your questions. So first, just a few logistics. If you could please use the Q&A box for questions on your bottom toolbar. You can send us questions for the panelists anytime throughout the program, and we'll answer them as we can near the end. The chat is open for you and is a good place to leave observations, reflections, kind words, but we'll be looking in the Q&A for your questions though. You can click on and show captions to see a live transcription if that's something that you feel like you need. And we'll also have some trivia questions for you throughout the evening. And it's not a test, but we hope they will be a fun way for you to participate. And we know that the webinar format is not the same as being in person, but we hope that this format will help increase accessibility to what we're presenting tonight. So with that, let's invite our first speaker. Claire, do you have a question for us?
I sure do, Yolanda. If folks want to go ahead and answer in the chat, our first trivia question of the night is, what birthday are we gathered here tonight to celebrate? Give folks a minute with that one. I wish I could give out prizes, but just a virtual pat on the back. Oh, I see a lot of love for the summer solstice. It is both that, and we are so thrilled to be celebrating 10 years of One Tam, of course. So a big thanks to everyone that's made those first 10 years a success. For those of you I have not had a chance to meet, my name is Claire Mooney. I serve as the Conservancy's Vice President for Park Projects and Conservation, and I also sit on the steering committee of One Tam. For those of you that might be new to One Tam, we're the partnership comprised of the National Park Service, California State Parks, Marin County Parks, Marin Water, and then the Parks Conservancy. And together we work to ensure a future that's healthy for Mount Tamalpais and the communities that depend on it. We came together 10 years ago, hence the birthday, with the idea that we could do more for the mountain together than we could do alone. And through deepening our coordination and sharing our resources, we could act at a mountain-wide scale. Now that we've reached this important 10-year milestone, we're reaffirming that what we've built is really strong and that we want to keep that work going. We're excited to celebrate 10 years, but moreover, we're really excited to step into year 11. Over 2023, we reflected on the work we did well together. And as a partnership, we decided that we would go ahead and reaffirm another 10 years of work together, as well as create a 5-year work plan and strategy to be successful. And the peak health work is instrumental in that. The work that we talk about tonight is a huge testament to the value of our approach of collaboration. We want to take a moment to celebrate this accomplishment and really thank all of the people that gave Peak Health a lot of time and effort. It is certainly no small feat to collect data year after year about key species and ecosystems, and then to come together to create this really holistic and incredibly huge body of collective work. And we did it not once, but twice. So I will introduce Bree Hardcastle in a moment, but also want to acknowledge that while we're sharing a lot about the science that we did together as a group of agencies, all of this happens within a larger regional context and history. In particular, it's important that we say and acknowledge that the lands managed by our One Tam partners are the Coast Miwok land, and that while peak health stems from a Western scientific and regulatory framework, our understanding is thus limited. With that, I'm going to hand the floor over to Bree Hardcastle, our California State Parks environmental scientist. Bree has been so instrumental to our partnership throughout, from her cheerleading to her talented work, and she's going to tell us more about the peak health update. Thanks for being here tonight, Bree.
Thanks so much, Claire. Hi, everyone. As Claire said, I'm Bree with State Parks. I work in the Bay Area District, and it's really an honor to be part of One Tam and to be able to talk with you tonight about peak health. I'm going to start the update by sharing why we undertook an ecological assessment of Mount Tamalpais' natural resource in 2016. And we're going to travel back to the beginning to understand what were our intentions, why did staff write this big report, what is the value. Tonight we'll also look at what is the new current update. We'll answer the question, is Mount Tam at peak health? And we'll also leave you with some of the key takeaways. But I'd like to start with a fun trivia question. What giant amphibian walks among us under redwood trees and swims in Redwood Creek? And if you have a guess, please put your answer in the chat. And if you need a hint, you got a glimpse on a previous slide, and it's the subject of a One Tam community science effort. Awesome. You are right. It is the giant salamander. Thank you so much. It's the California giant salamander. And I have one more question for you, a little follow-up bonus. How big is giant? What length can the California giant salamander reach from its nose to its tail? And you can put your answer in the vote that just came up. 1 to 3 inches, 6 to 12 inches, or 1 to 2 feet. All right, it looks like most of you are very successful. 6 to 12 inches it is. So why am I talking about this amazing and, in my opinion, very adorable animal? Well, they're one of the largest salamanders anywhere, and they also live year-round on Mount Tam in headwater streams and adjacent riparian areas. And they're really excellent indicators for the health of these habitats. And the Mount Tam region supports giant salamander populations in a number of streams. And we have some knowledge of their distribution. This species was identified as a knowledge gap in our first peak health process, and we really needed more information to protect them. And this example is a single species, and we often look closely at one thing, but health is really about a network of relationships between the California giant salamander and other species, the physical environment, and humans. And each of these is really a piece of the puzzle in the complex ecosystem, and putting together enough pieces, we really start to get a picture of the overall health. In addition, this is a great example of how all of us can get involved in community science opportunities and contribute to our collective knowledge, since we're using crowdsourced observations from iNaturalist to track them, which we can all still contribute to. And now I'll move on to the more serious part of the update. I think it's worth going back a little bit and talking about what peak health is and why we did it. I want to highlight that measuring the health of the mountain, or peak health for short, is one of the many good things that has come out of our One Tam partnership. It was one of our first big collaborative efforts and really helped show the value of bringing our expertise and our information together and thinking at the mountain-wide scale. It stems from the same core idea of One Tam, and that's really that we can take better care of Mount Tam together than alone, just focused on our own individual pieces. And so in order to make better science-based decisions for the species and ecosystems we steward, we really needed to look at that bigger scale, especially because the challenges we face don't really care about these artificial property lines and boundaries. Peak Health was a first of its kind effort for Mount Tam, and to our knowledge, any mountain, and the first time we really brought together this kind of information all in one place. And we also just want to recognize that our work happens at different scales sometimes countywide or focused on site-based work that then really feeds into regional resilience. And I just want to clarify that Peak Health assesses species and communities within the traditional One Tam area of focus, which is outlined in the center of this map. That first Peak Health effort back in 2016 was designed to balance multiple different goals. And like I said, for the first time, we brought together data and the best professional judgment of over 60 scientists from One Tam agencies, the Parks Conservancy, and other partners. And we all came together to say what we collectively know and also what we don't know about the lands that we steward, and then to help focus efforts to fill those gaps. We wanted to do so in a publicly meaningful way, and wanted to support outreach and volunteerism, community engagement and education about our local environment, and also inspire support. Also, we want to help prioritize where the One Tam partners focus our stewardship programs and resources. And it's important to note that as partners, the way we interact with Peak Health is as a really key reference that brings together the most current data and establishes benchmarks. But Peak Health is not an official management document. It doesn't supersede our individual agency policy. The power of One Tam is that it really allows us to coordinate and share resources more effectively, while each partner maintains their respective organizational responsibilities, and each agency sets the priorities and makes decisions for management done on their respective lands. Our agencies also have multifaceted missions, and Peak Health is really focused on the natural resource part of our missions and the landscape scale science. And all of these goals have helped shape what measuring the health of the mountain, or peak health, would look like and include. So what did Peak Health 2016 include? There are many different models out there for this type of assessment, and ours is unique because of our goals. As I said, we really wanted Peak Health to be as much of a communications tool as a science effort. So the first thing we had to do was come together and define what we meant about ecological health for the mountain. There's really not just one way to define that. And we intentionally spoke in broad terms of resilience and biodiversity, with the recognition that nature is inherently dynamic, and the One Tam agencies are dedicated to preserving biodiversity and natural processes in the face of change, especially climate change. Then we created a long list of ideas for what would make good indicators of ecological health, such as specific species or an ecological community on Mount Tam, as well as metrics to measure their condition and also their trend. But we also needed to develop some criteria for filtering those indicators because we knew we couldn't include everything. And among those filters, we're choosing things that were measurable with existing data, and also that revealed something about aspects of ecosystem health. Then, once all that was done and it was pencils down, the question was, how do we communicate those findings? And that first Peak Health effort produced the results that the overall health of the mountain was fair or caution. We found that some things were doing well and others weren't doing so well. And there were places where we could intervene and possibly make a difference. And the process itself was super valuable. For example, we identified gaps in our knowledge, like species or communities that we didn't know much about, and studying them would help us fill in the bigger picture of the mountain's health. And when we were done, we now, for the first time, had this really important reference point. And the project allowed the 4 One Tam land management agencies to collect and synthesize all this existing information and set those baselines to allow us to track change over time. We also, in that original document, summarized potential future research and monitoring, management actions that could help support each ecological health indicator. Peak Health has and continues to serve as a foundation for One Tam. It really underpins a ton of what we do as a collective. And there's so much that followed from Peak Health. And I'd like to just share one example of that. So Peak Health helps spur and support large-scale One Tam programs, including our early detection rapid response program for managing invasive weeds. It also revealed our fine-scale vegetation data needs. The process, that was a process that identified that really important data gap. And because of that, we were able to get resources to pursue a countywide veg map. And as you can see, the map on the left shows the level of vegetation cover data we had back in 2016. And then the map on the right shows what we had in 2022 after identifying and filling that, as you can see, very large gap. The vegetation map then set the stage for the next step, which was collaborating on our forest health strategy, which we released this last fall, and that you'll hear more about from Danny later tonight. And with this example, you can really see how each of our individual steps has built on one another. So with that, that brings us to the new update and the just released report. And I am very happy to pass you back to Yolanda, who will share more.
Thank you, Bree. That was a great historical reference there. So we said that we'd update the original report in 5 years, and between, the story of COVID and all the challenges that presented it, it became more than 5 years. But we're excited to finally say we've got the updated report completed, and it's based on the 2022 data for those of you out there looking at dates and counting. So what's new? Well, there are 3 new indicators. And those represent important data gaps that we have filled since 2016. Those include the bees, bats, and California giant salamanders, each pictured here. So we also contracted with our partners Pepperwood Preserve to include a new climate vulnerability analysis to help us project how the mountain's ecosystems may fare in different climate scenarios, and to also help us think about how we might prepare for that. So in addition to that climate piece, other new data sources improved and changed our assessment, such as Bree already mentioned this, but that Marin County fine scale vegetation map that we mentioned before. We also looked at the potential of community source data through platforms such as iNaturalist. So now we'll get to that answer of the question that's behind all of this. Is Mount Tamalpais at peak health? In our 2023 report, we found that the overall condition of the mountain is still fair, just as it was reported in 2016. And now that could seem like an underwhelming headline to reach the same result twice after those 7 years. But behind it, there is really a more complex story of how we arrived here, plus some useful learnings, which we'll get to. So for those of you accounting, we got to this overall result by combining the condition and trend of 22 individual indicators of species and ecosystems. The 2016 report included 7 vegetation communities and 10 wildlife indicators. Now in the new report, we have 8 vegetation communities and 14 wildlife species and communities. And as mentioned earlier, we added bats, bees, and California giant salamanders. And for those of you out there, if you already took a look at the report before coming here, you'll see that bee badgers no longer have its own separate chapter, but it has been merged with mammals. So let's look a little bit closely at this. Okay, so we're using biodiversity as an indication of overall health. And what we did was we just combined things and what we're calling just rolling up those individual health indicators. This allows us to begin to explore how well ecological systems and landscape scale processes are functioning across the mountain as a whole. So here we have 2 figures to show the groups of indicators whose metrics rolled up into an overall result. On the left, we have data from the 2016 report, and on the right, we have the 2023 overall biodiversity. So the green sections are groups with good condition. The yellow indicates caution or fair condition, and the red indicates a poor condition. And the dotted line in the middle, the circle, indicates that our level of confidence in this result is medium, so not low or hot. And the arrows indicate the direction of the trend, whether the condition for each group is holding, increasing, or decreasing. So you'll notice that we didn't use trend in our overall update this time. And this is for a few reasons. And so that's why you see that it says unknown. We didn't establish a trend in the overall condition for Mount Tam between 2016 and 2022 because the addition of the new indicators that changed things. We expanded the geographic scope. We also added new data from that new fine scale vegetation mapping effort, and you could see the difference in the slide that was shown earlier. That helped illuminate those communities differently than they were before. In addition, some indicators improved while others declined or did not see a change in condition. And experts changed a few of the metrics. Some dropped, some were new. So there were just differences. And one thing we're learning about rolling up to a single overall result, and while it's a useful communication tool, we've learned that a 5-year timescale may not be enough time to detect a change for overall diversity. And for some species or communities, 5 years between evaluations may not be enough to detect changes. And with each update and other factors like we experienced this time, such as a change in the area of focus, the new and improved data sources, technology changes, and even changes in individual indicators may complicate a roll-up comparison. So these are all the factors that the One Tam partners will be exploring as we go forward. Let's go a level deeper to see the status of some of those individual indicators. We have seen change in a few of them. We pulled out a selection of indicators to show a range of what we saw. So let's start with the serpentine barren and endemics. So these comprise some of our rarest plants. They're in fair condition, but showing a stable trend instead of a decreasing trend this time. We also have open canopy oak woodlands, and while still in a cautionary status, our oak woodlands appear to be holding instead of declining as we feared in 2016. Next, we're moved to coast redwoods. So we separate our coast redwood community by old growth and second growth because they have different characteristics and wildlife species that can occupy them. And given that a majority of the redwood forests have been heavily logged. So overall, we have not observed, based on the data that we have collected, any detectable change in redwood forest health in the One Tam area focus since the 2016 report. Let's move into the range of looking at some wildlife indicators. Bees, starting with invertebrates first. We identified bees as an important data gap in the 2016 effort and began a community science effort to inventory bee species the following year. It produced results that were encouraging in terms of the health of bee populations. And while we don't yet have enough data to satisfy our metrics and considering our early results, we're shifting from an inventory and collections to focusing on monitoring specific bee communities. And that will help inform future and management studies and contribute to larger data sets. So we're looking at 3 monitoring efforts, and that includes the ground nesting bee surveys because 70% of our bees actually nest in the ground. And it's an important group to study. We're working with the Xerxes Society on adopting sites for Bumblebee Atlas. And we're also monitoring and surveying for San Francisco leafcutter bee, a species that hasn't been seen in Marin County for decades, but we know where it was last known to occur. Fish, coho salmon are stable on the north side of Mount Tam at Lagunitas Creek, but nearly extirpated on the south side, Redwood Creek. And despite major efforts to help them, these are just the focus of major habitat restoration work in Redwood Creek, which we hope will make a difference in the coming years. Steelhead appear to be stable in both watersheds, but remain in poor condition. Next, amphibians, California leg-rugged frog we'll look at. It continues to be in good condition. Western pond turtle, deemed as one of the most charismatic species by the chapter author. If you attended the summit in 2022, you would have heard him say that. Noted that this species remains fair and slightly increasing. There was a Head Start program at Muir Beach, Redwood Creek, that released 42 juvenile pond turtles between 2017 and 2021. And that has likely contributed to this good news. Northern spotted owl, good condition, stable trend. Bats, we think bats are good. And like bees, we don't have trend data since we've only just begun studying them, and more monitoring will tell us more. Finally, it's important to note that we still have data gaps. The condition of many other important indicators of Mount Tam's ecological health, including invertebrates, other than the bees. But there's also lichen, hardwood forests, riparian areas, seeps and springs. Those remain largely unknown. However, as with 2016 indicators identified as needs that we have now included, we hope to add them in the future for other updates. So additionally, specific information gaps about existing indicators may continue to be strategically addressed. Another way that we looked at overall health is by using models that provide a broader view of how climate change may affect different communities. We asked our colleagues at Pepperwood Preserve to summarize existing information to form a hypothesis about how climate change may impact Mount Tam, particularly our vegetation communities. And I'm not going to say more about this since we'll get to hear directly from them in just a minute. But know that as we key in on how our work relates to climate resilience, this kind of information will help us understand the impacts of climate change we may deal with and help us prioritize vegetation indicators for future monitoring, plus action to increase resilience. So what are some key takeaways? The health of the Mount Tamalpais is fair. Some things are doing well and others need our help. There are still some things we don't know yet. We need to keep a pulse on the mountain's ecosystems to understand change over time, where we can make a difference and make science-based decisions for our landscapes. Third, the information is foundational to other important efforts such as forest health, climate resilience, and community engagement. The peak health report process has been a valuable collaborative effort for One Tam and may look different in the future as we consider other options for sustainable and meaningful tracking. And lastly, climate change is a major factor in the future health of mountain and the changing context of this work. So that's our update. We're now going to take a deeper look into climate change as a driver of ecological health. So let's welcome Kai Henifin to the screen.
Thank you, Yolanda. Appreciate that. Happy solstice, everybody, or summer solstice almost. And thank you all for being here. My name is Kai Henifin. I'm the Fire and Climate Resilience Coordinator at Pepperwood. Pepperwood was really tasked with reviewing the models and publications that came out either before, just as the publication of the Peak Health Report was coming out, or things that came in between the 2016 first edition and then the second edition in 2022. The intent was really to better understand any changes in the impacts to species and ecosystems, as well as identify research that would help us develop some baselines for those new indicators. And then the baselines would become a place where future monitoring could be built. The purposes for all of this is really to inform stewardship action. So we started to look first at primary impacts of temperature and precipitation. And then we looked at secondary impacts to hydrology, fire hazard, and ecosystems for the One Tam focus area. We based our assessment on existing models, and we really wanted to align it with the California Fourth Climate Assessment for the Bay Area region. So we used similar models there. We added some new information to the report about climate change impacts on wildfire, vegetation vulnerability, and sea level rise. We summarized some key results for species indicators in the Peak Health Report, and we reviewed those with the subject matter experts. And what we found, which is really, really enlightening, to both see where the value of climate models are and where the limitations are for these kinds of data for many of the wildlife indicators, in particular, the aquatic species. These species are very sensitive to the timing and duration of precipitation events, which really isn't something that climate models are able to predict. So that was really a helpful insight. The value of climate models is really to generate these hypotheses and these trends, which then can be used to help prioritize indicators that need to then be monitored and evaluated at the local level. Tracking change over time and updating climate projections with actual data or experienced climate is key to adaptive management moving forward. So my question to all of you today is, speaking of experienced climate, I'm curious what changes you have been noticing over time, and you can go ahead and put that in the comments in the chat. Must be shy. Are these expected changes? More winds, more hot days, warmer temperatures? So really, these observations are really, really valuable. They help us really check our assumptions in our climate models to better understand kind of where things need to be modified or where they might be on track or off track. So that's really helpful to have that direct observation. Wildfire season, yeah, and flood season, all those things. Amazing. So during my portion of this presentation, I'll be sharing out some of these hypotheses of future climate projection and the potential impacts to key indicators. I'll present a range of climate scenarios that are suitable for vulnerability assessments in the One Tam region. The presentation will briefly touch on some of the fire modeling outputs and what they can tell us about wildfire hazards and what they can't tell us. Then I'll go ahead and wrap up by reviewing results from an important regional model that projects potential vegetation's biotic responses to change in climate. It's called the accurately probabilistic vegetation model, which we'll refer to as PBM for short. This model really captures the suitable and unsuitable climate conditions for a subset of vegetation in the Bay Area. It illuminates the probability that a species might expand or contract or stay stable under specific future climate conditions, and which will be a big factor in how the landscape looks as we move through the decades. The reality is that long-term climate change will alter the basic physical conditions under which native plants communities on Mount Tam have evolved, with climate exposure causing a shift in their composition and distribution. So where do we get these climate models and what are they showing us? There are over 30 research groups across the globe who produce models, which we call the general circulation models, GCMs. It's also known as the global climate models that attempt to predict future conditions for the planet. The California Department of Water Resources selected a subset of 10 of the most suitable models in California and then reduced those down to 4 models that really represent the range of the simulations. And here we're presenting them as a 4-square model or 4-square representation, with each of the squares representing a distinct climate future based on its change in temperature and change in precipitation from current, from historic conditions. So, as you go to the right, you get the hotter models. As you go up, you get the models that are wetter. So at the top left, we have the warm wet model. In the top right, we have the hot wet model. And then on the bottom, we have the warm dry model and then the hot dry. So I'm showing you this 4-square diagram because it's really a useful way to think about climate models. It's there's all these models and they fall within these particular squares. So it's best to describe them kind of in this way. Also, I'll be talking about the probabilistic vegetation model of increasing and decreasing, and so we'll kind of come back to that. So now let's look into the crystal ball of climate models and see what it looks like for this particular region. So again, each model that you look at represents a different degree of change in projected temperature and rainfall. We treat each scenario as a distinct physical simulation. In this table, we're using the description of these models based on their change from historic, the same naming convention, with those first 2 models being the wetter models and the second models being the drier models. We're having less rainfall. When we're looking at models, we want to look at the mid-century, which is 2035 to 2069, and then the late century, which is 2070 to 29. So the mid-century projections can really help identify what might be impacted in the short term and what can be considered for some land management action now, while later projections can help identify long-term trends and can be considered for long-term adaptation planning. And then next, we're going to go to precipitation. Did it advance? Okay. Precipitation is where climate models really can be the most variable. So all models agree that the climate is getting warmer. So there's agreement amongst all models. Where the uncertainty comes in is really around precipitation. So projected annual precipitation for the Mount Tam area can range from a little bit under 1% in the mid-century to 37% in the mid-century. And then in the late century, it looks like there's a mild increase of 1% up to 50%, depending on the model. So increased variability means that peak rainfall events generated by atmospheric rivers in the region may cause ecological disturbances due to floods, as well as more frequent and intense droughts. So this really affects the streams and the wetlands, as well as other vegetation communities. Through the latter 2 models, the drier models in the region, we're seeing a mild increase even in those drier models. This, we think, is a regional characteristic based on a statewide model. So there's a statewide model that characterizes the state in general as drier, but it's also including things, the desert environments of California. The drier models also suggest there may be a narrower winter window with a potential for earlier onset of warmer and drier spring conditions. Fog along the coast in these areas may mitigate some of the climate impacts by reducing incoming solar radiation and provide water inputs into the landscape. Climate models are really uncertain along the coastline due to the edge effect of spatial data and the transition between the land and the ocean, as well as the lack of fog data. There is an effort going on right now trying to collect more fog data because that's really a gap. So we're going to move on to fire. We know from the devastating fires that have swept across the West in the past decade that wildfires are getting larger and they're more severe due to the changes in climate and land use practices. The frequency, severity, and impacts of the wildfires are that are sensitive to climate change, as well as many other factors, including development patterns, temperature increases, wind patterns, and precipitation change in the past 2 decades. Only about 127 acres of the Mount Tam area has burned. Warmer and drier conditions due to climate change combined with dense vegetation or fuels make for an increased probability of wildfire in Marin County. The 4th climate assessment projects an increase of about 10% in the probability of wildfire by the end of the century, with an increase in the area burned at about 42% mid-century and then 97%. So you can see that in the graph that it's the bar is getting quite wide. So there's the line in the middle is the average, that purple line. Mount Tam's ecosystems may be considered fire adapted. However, the absence of wildfire events in recent decades means that there is a significant accumulation of fuels and vegetation. This is really vegetation that's capable of feeding wildfire on the landscape. The image to the right shows areas where, if a wildfire was to occur, the areas that would have the areas that predict levels of severity where they would be. So the red would show in this map the probability of high fire severity. So similar to climate models, fire models are just models, and they can't predict events or fire characteristics, but they can tell us they can kind of tell us the trends that are happening, the likelihood of these things increasing. However, they can't tell us the specifics about timing or location or ignition sources. So the good news is that potential restoration and beneficial fire, where feasible, can be considered part of the climate adaptation strategy to reduce fuels and reduce ecosystem and restore ecosystems. Reducing hazards on the landscape can slow or even stop the advancement of wildfire. So there is something we can do to decrease the likelihood of these bigger, more catastrophic fires. Okay, so let's dive into the vegetation portion of this presentation and look at specific vegetation indicators. We summarized existing information from that probabilistic vegetation model, or that PVM, as we like to call it, that we mentioned before, that really forms hypotheses about climate change's impact on particular vegetation communities. The PVM took 18 climate models spanning the range of temperature and precipitation over 3 time periods. So we're really trying to capture all the possibilities across the century, and then combine that with 22 vegetation types that were defined often by a single woody species. And we'll get into some of the more species-specific information next. Really to evaluate the response of these species to those 4 climate conditions, that 4 square. Here we're seeing a full set of the results as a sort of, we call it the layer cake. And it's to read the layer cake, you really want to go left to right. So along the bottom, you'll see an increase in mean temperature, which is predicted over the next decade. So that's sort of your time moving forward, with the baseline being that first bar. So that's the baseline starting point. And then the colors indicate each of the vegetation types. And as those bands expand, that means that particular species is likely to increase. Where the bands get smaller means a decline. So if you look at that band of brown bars, which is chamois chaparral, it's increasing in probability over the area that'll be covering over time. So you can see that kind of getting a bit wider as it goes to the right-hand side of that layer cake. So the results of the layer cakes were then summarized across the Bay Area into smaller units, landscape units, to really capture a local view of each of these woody species in some cases, to kind of talk a little bit more. And so I think the next slide is a little bit of a refresher to go back to that foursquare that we saw earlier as it relates to those different climate conditions. As I described, each of the squares in the foursquare is representative of a set of conditions. So again, that warm, wet, hot, wet, warm, dry, hot, dry. Now you're going to see these squares filled with a color that indicates the suitability of that specific climate condition for the vegetation species. Dark orange means a dramatic decline is predicted for the vegetation under those conditions. The yellow means a moderate decline is predicted. Gray means the vegetation is likely to stay stable or similar to its current condition. And then the green means that there's increase in its, this vegetation is going to expand. So in the upper right-hand corner, you can see an example foursquare for a climate tolerant species. You can see lots of gray and green, indicating that there's stability in that species for that climate condition, as well as potentially some expansion as the climate warms. In the lower right-hand corner is an example of foursquare where the species is vulnerable to climate. Yellow and orange indicate declines across all climate scenarios. And in the peak health report, as Yolanda mentioned, these were rolled then up into a red, yellow, and green sort of indicator. Okay. So the next few slides will demonstrate climate suitability for some of the key vegetation indicators included in the peak health report. So we're going to start with the open oak woodland, primarily on the eastern portion of One Tam. There's some vulnerable oaks there and one resilient oak. So the blue oaks and the Oregon oaks are predicted to decline in areas across almost all scenarios, while the coast live oak is kind of the one that's is the most resilient and is stable across all scenarios. The coast live oak is sensitive to increases in rainfall and warmer summers, yet not enough to see decline in the climate futures. There's also the potential for this species to expand up the north coast as the climate warms and dries out. So in the 2016 peak health report, oak woodland was indicated as declining. A little concern there, but in 2022, we see that change just to caution. This may be a result of different models that were used for each of the publications. However, oak woodlands should be monitored for other impacts, such as the sudden oak death and Douglas fir encroachment. So you want to go to the next slide, I think. Earlier, I was showing you that layer cake where you saw the chamois expanding as the temperature increases towards the end of the century. This is an example of a climate change winner. You can see that many chaparral species will remain stable or increase under all climate scenarios. Coyote brush and California bay will stay stable under all scenarios, not surprising, since they're drought tolerant. These indicators also went from declining in 2016 to caution in 2022. However, these scrublands are losing acreage to forest succession due to fire suppression. And then we're going to move on to some sensitive species that come up time and time again. Oops, did we miss a? I think there's one slide back. Is there a redwood slide? Yeah, there. So redwoods and Douglas firs often come up as species that people are really interested in knowing more about related to climate. So redwoods are particularly sensitive, as we all know, to moisture and temperature, and will likely persist in cool northern slopes and riparian and moist valleys. These are primary candidates for protection and stewardship, notably in the One Tam area, which Yolanda mentioned. There's a combination of old growth forest and the younger forest, and the old growth is in good condition, where the second growth forest is in a caution state. Douglas fir is also sensitive specifically to climatic water deficit. This is a tricky one. When you think about climatic water deficit, you can think of it as a glass of water or a glass for water. So that can hold water all the way to the top. But if you only fill it half full, the deficit that's left between the top of the glass and where the water is the deficit. And that's where the species can experience some stress because it doesn't have all the water that it wants. For Douglas fir, that means if it doesn't get the full drink of glass of water, it's still kind of thirsty. And Douglas firs particularly like to have that full glass of water near the winter months. Douglas fir respond well when the winter temperatures get a little bit warmer, but then they don't do so well if it gets above 3 degrees Celsius as an increase. These sensitive species are on the edge of their suitable climate space and may require some thoughtful management. Another sensitive vegetation type is grasslands. The health of grasslands is driven as much by management as by climate. Land management or cultural practices such as prescribed fire, grazing, and mowing can all be applied to support this vegetation indicator. Additional work in both the mapping and the monitoring of grasslands is needed to establish baselines that we can then see some trends, or we can infer some trends in the future. And finally, to recap some of the main points from this section, all climate scenarios indicate an increase in temperature, and real-time measurement trends indicate our projections are likely very conservative. Precipitation is highly variable, and most species, the timing and the amount of rainfall is really important, and the climate models are not able to tell us that information. Projections are simulations. They can be evaluated on their own, yet agreement across projections indicate a trend. The diagram to the right looks at trends for different biodiversity indicators based on a variety of factors, including their response to climate change. For many of the indicators that we evaluated for this report, there just really wasn't enough information in literature yet to summarize the impacts of climate change. So that's an area to kind of think about in the next version. We did hear about many monitoring effects that were ongoing to develop baselines to measure change over time, which is really great. And to wrap up, why don't we look at climate models what they can predict in the future? We look at projections to identify trends that can help inform conservation planning by highlighting priority areas of concern or vulnerable species. We need further evaluation and monitoring at the local level to measure change and condition over time. This is all to underscore that keeping a pulse on the landscape is really important, and in light of uncertainties in climate change. So that's the end of my portion, and I'm going to pass it back to Yolanda to talk about some forest health.
Thank you, Kai. I think it's stretch time. So let's take a stretch break. I would like to invite you to take a stretch. And while you're doing that, we've just heard a lot of information before our final presentation. So you can take this time to drop a question in the Q&A. And remember that we're only looking at the Q&A section for your questions. And we'll get to those at the end. Okay, I think it's time for some peak health trivia. Okay, so about how many kinds of plants do we have on the mountain? Is it 100, 500, 1,000, 5,000? You can use the poll and select which one is your choice. Okay, the vote's coming in. Ah, somebody has been reading the report. You're right, it's about 1,000. And to be exact, it's 1,103, according to our report at this time. And did you know that about 70% are native plant species and about 30% are weeds? And while all of these weeds pose a threat to our ecosystem, and some do, and that's why our work to help the mountain thrive through managing priority weeds, such as through our early detection rapid response program that aims to catch weed patches before they become a bigger problem. And they look at catching those priority weed patches, just want to emphasize that. And that is so important. This kind of work will be even more important as climate change progresses and impacts our plant communities. So I am going to pass it over to our next speaker, who will be talking about forest health. I think it's a good segue as our final talk of the evening. So now that we have all this information, what are we doing with it? So in addition to tracking priority weeds, another example in our action is to increase the resilience of our forests. So I'd like to invite our final speaker up. Please welcome Danny Franco to the screen.
Hi. Thanks, everybody. Good to be here. Oh, we have some more trivia for you all. This is the right audience for this question. What kinds of forests do we have in Marin County? And by kinds of forests, let's say associations or alliances, because I see there's some smarties in this webinar. See if we can get all of the alliance or associations of forests in Marin County. Definitely Oak Woodlands, Adrian, gold star. Fire dependent, sure, Larry Minikis. That's good. There we go. All right, now they're coming in. I'll give you a little bit more time. People might still be stretching. It's 7:30 on a school night. There we go. Some oak, some madrone. Oh, the redwood chaparral. That sounds like an association of some kind. Interesting. Sure, why not coastal shrub? Thank you, Judy. We have been in a lot of willow and alder together at Bolinas Y over the last however many weeks and hours. Well, these are all great responses. Let's see if I can drive these slides. Okay, quick outline on what I'm going to talk about. I'll give you a bit of background on the Marin Regional Forest Health Strategy. I will I'm sorry, Michaela. I don't think I can actually drive these. Are you driving?
Hey there, I'm letting you drive, but I think there might be a little bit of a lag, so
Oh, I'll
just
be
a little
patient.
patience, yeah.
Oh, Eva's got a question, and that's a great reminder for folks that if you have questions, please use the Q&A function and not the chat. I know we are all on Zoom fatigue, but the questions must go in the Q&A. Them's the rules. Okay, let me try now, Michaela. Okay, that's cool. I think I can drive now. I just won't rush. Great. So we already had some background on where the regional forest health strategy came from, and it really comes out of that initial 2016 peak health report, as Bree mentioned. So there it is, the initial body of work. Some key things that came out of the 2016 peak health report that relate to the forest health strategy. We covered this, but I'm going to reiterate it. Establish baseline conditions for the ecological health of 15 plus vegetation communities and wildlife indicator species, developed a process for monitoring changes over time. As you know from today, this has been updated in 2023 using current best available data from ongoing science and monitoring efforts to evaluate and discuss condition trends. I've put the links in the slides. I think the slides will be made available to you all so that you can do your homework, and I don't have to go over it all here. This is critical. This report in 2016 highlighted the need to work with partners to address threats to forest ecosystem function, including introduced weeds, plant diseases, and the exclusion of fire. Another key takeaway from the 2016 peak health report was that forests in Marin can benefit from active management. But it left us with some remaining questions like, how do we approach that challenge? And where should our partners focus their management actions? Time is finite. What does the data in science say? And in what ways does forest health intersect with prevention of extreme wildfire? So all of these big picture questions really underscored the need for us to do this strategic planning effort, which we call the forest health strategy. So this slide is exhaustive, and it's meant to be because the forests provide us with really so much. Forests provide us with the natural processes that take place within forests provide benefits for all living creatures. We sometimes call these benefits ecosystem services. Marin County has, here's the answer to your question, 24 distinct forest types, including conifers such as coast redwood and Douglas fir, oak, woodland, grassland savannas, evergreen hardwoods like Pacific madrone, and fire-dependent species like bishop pine. Forest ecosystems provide habitat for wildlife such as bats, salmon, northern spotted owls, and so many more. Cute picture of owls. 3/4 of Marin's water comes from the heavily forested Mount Tamalpais watershed. Without healthy and resilient forests, Marin's water quality and quantity is vulnerable to threats like extreme wildfire, erosion, and sedimentation. Trees breathe in carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas that traps heat and contributes to climate change. They breathe out oxygen, which is what we need. Forests also store carbon in their biomass, which can get released in the event of a high severity wildfire, adding more carbon dioxide to the air. Forests, like other natural resources and landscapes in Marin, are tribal cultural resources that are interconnected with each other and with the Federated Indians of Great Rancheria. Through stewardship and active use to perpetuate cultural lifeways and fulfill the tribe's responsibilities to maintain forest health and sustainability. The forested parklands and protected open spaces in Marin provide people with opportunities to get outdoors and exercise, activities that are healthy for the body and the mind. They also draw millions of visitors each year, which generates revenue for local governments, businesses, and creates jobs. The ecological health and long-term resilience of forests and woodlands in Marin are already being impacted by plant disease, introduced weeds, present and past land use, fire exclusion, the legacy of colonization, and climate change. here's my bottom line because I ran out of space. Trees and forests take care of us. We need to take care of them. Okay, I've got a quote for you because this is the book I'm reading right now, and it's a little long, but bear with me. Humans either conquer nature and destroy its integrity, or they visit it as an outsider, idealizing its beauty and largely leaving it alone. These seemingly contradictory attitudes, to idealize nature or to commodify it, are really two sides of the same coin. Both positions treat nature as an abstraction, separate from humans and not understood, not real. Although the conservation movement resulted in significant areas of the state being set aside as public land, it also fostered the concept of wilderness and the policy of wildfire suppression, both of which overlooked the historical role of Indians in managing the landscape and ignored the needs of contemporary Indians. If you haven't read Tending the Wild, that's my plug for Tending the Wild. So let's talk about collaboration with the tribe on the forest health strategy, because this is something that's really important and that we're really proud of. All land, this has been said, but I'm going to say it again. All land in what is now known as Marin County is Coast Miwok land. Today, the Coast Miwok are represented by the Federated Indians of Great Rancheria, the tribe. They are a federally recognized tribe that includes both Coast Miwok and Southern Pomo. The tribe is the only federally recognized tribe with ancestral lands in Marin County. The tribe continues to steward the lands, waters, and forests in what is now referred to as Marin County, maintaining relationships and responsibilities in these places since time immemorial. The combination of colonization, settlement, urbanization, fire suppression, past and present land use, and policies that prevent or avoid forest management have disrupted the tribe's relationships with some areas in the county and created a departure from healthy conditions in Marin's forests. Early on in our strategic planning process, the Forest Health Working Group, that's One Tam Partners, recognized that the tribe possesses specific knowledge about tribal cultural resources, including forests. Tribal access, stewardship, and the use of these tribal cultural resources and areas are integral to the health and sustainability of the forests and other ecosystems, and the forests are integral to the health and well-being of the tribe. Through conversation between the tribe and One Tam Partner Cultural Resource staff, the tribe directed Dr. Peter Nelson to participate as a technical reviewer of strategy documents and to author a standalone chapter focused on traditional ecological knowledge and recommendations for tribal partnership. If you only read one chapter in the Forest Health Strategy, I'll give you a plug for Chapter 3, Stewardship and Partnership with Federated Indians of Great Rancheria. It's really important work. While this collaboration is a meaningful step forward for strengthening tribal participation in planning for Marin's forests and woodlands, work to include the tribe in all aspects of forest management is critical and is ongoing. So this is just a first step. Okay, quick overview of the process we took on the forest health strategy, and then I'll jump into some key findings. And we will leave time for questions. So our process was to develop goals for the health and resilience of 5 key forest types to protect or enhance ecosystem services. That's that big laundry list of things I gave you, that all the benefits of forests. Using the Marin Countywide Fine Scale Vegetation Map, which you've already heard about, as the basic unit of analysis, we explored the distribution of key forest types across Marin County. Ooh, that's a cool one. So that's the distribution of the 5 key forest types we profiled in the forest health strategy. It's about 50% of all forests in Marin. Identify, locate, and summarize threats to forest health and resilience using metrics from the Veg Map and other available data. Create a framework for identifying priority projects and various treatment approaches. Describe methods for monitoring treatment outcomes, hint, peak health, and landscape changes. Okay, now to the key findings. There's so many key findings I could share, but I have to summarize 4 years worth of work in 15 minutes here, and I've probably got about half of that left. So I'm going to go quickly. These are some of the highlights. What did we learn about the distribution of forests? There are 118,000 acres of forest and woodland in Marin County, which is equivalent to an area of 184 square miles, or if you took a paintbrush and painted all of the city county of San Francisco 4 times over with trees, that's how many trees you have in Marin County. Forests cover over a third of all the land in Marin. So, working in partnership is the only way to increase forest health and resilience across all types at a meaningful scale. Check, we're doing that. Climate change, Kai talked a lot about this. I won't belabor it. The big takeaway here is that changes in climate are likely to make some areas less suitable for certain forest and woodland types and will interact with other stressors to further reduce forest resilience in some areas. Climate winners, climate losers, and how those shifting patterns change on the landscape is largely going to depend on how what kinds of disturbance we get and what climate futures materialize. Things are going to change. So using the best available climate science and data, One Tam partners can work together with the tribe and other agencies to identify and protect refugia. Refugia are areas that will remain relatively buffered from contemporary climate change over time to enable persistence for forests and woodlands in Marin County. This, I'm glad to tell you, is already happening and will be strengthened by the work of the Golden Gate Biosphere Climate Adaptation Project, foreshadowing for future One Tam presentations and webinars, I'm sure. Okay, this is a big one. Fire exclusion impacts. You've already heard about this, and some of you may know that this is what we explored in the Forest Health Strategy. Again, Chapter 3, you should read it, Indigenous Stewardship and Tribal Partnership. By design, California Native Americans created cultural landscapes with fire where grassland and tan oak groves thrived in a region that would be naturally dominated by coniferous forests. The term fire exclusion, we use that term to include both modern fire suppression and the interruption of Coast Miwok burning due to Euro-American colonization. So both putting out of lightning caused fires and the interruption making cultural burning actually illegal for the Coast Miwok in Marin. Without fire, the landscape has changed significantly, resulting in a loss of biodiversity, changes in forest and woodland distribution and structure, and a hazardous buildup of fuels in many areas. Okay, sudden oak death. Someone said it in the chat earlier. That's a pathogen. We looked at mortality and pathogen impacts to forests in the Forest Health Strategy. Mortality and pathogen impacts were detected across all key forest types analyzed in the Forest Health Strategy, altering the fuel arrangement, structure, and composition of the affected forests. Across Marin County, we found a substantial portion of native forests have trace to moderate canopy mortality, 12% of all forests, with an additional 5% classified as having relatively high levels of visible mortality in the canopy in 2018. Big caveat here, the methods that we use to map mortality don't fully capture the extent of sudden oak death impacts, which has contributed to a near total loss of mature tan oak in Marin County. Next steps, current work. I think this is my maybe second to last slide or last slide. We're going to continue to work to build and strengthen relationships with the Federated Indians of Great Rancheria to integrate the tribe's knowledge and perspective into the study, use, and management of areas that are of interest to the tribe. We are going to continue to conduct scientific monitoring of the health and conditions of key vegetation communities, including forests, and the intersections between forest health work and our field-based inventories and community science initiatives like Marin Wildfire Watch, the Rare Plant Monitoring Program, BAP Monitoring Program, our Pollinator Program, the Peak Health Report Program, if you can call it that. As a part of the Golden Gate Biosphere Region Climate Adaptation Project, that's a mouthful, One Tam partners are working to assess climate vulnerabilities for key wildlife and vegetation communities, including forests. Kai gave you some insight into some of that work today. Results of this effort will further inform stewardship and restoration actions designed to protect refugia and increase climate resilience for these species. And Last bullet, the One Tam partners are definitely working together to advance opportunities to fundraise for, plan, and develop and implement projects and programs to increase forest health and resilience at scale in Marin County. If you're a hiker, you may have seen some of this work. As we outlined in the Forest Health Strategy, this includes partnering across jurisdictional boundaries, collaborating with the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority in some areas, and their fire department member agencies to expand the use of beneficial fire in Marin County. We are bringing back prescribed fire. Folks are doing it. The One Tam partners are doing it. It's happening. What's next? This is not me. This is you, Yolanda. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to give it to Becca. I'll give it to Becca. How about I give it to Becca? Becca,
We'll
our
give
One
it to
Tam
Becca.
development, our One Tam development membership
Hi.
manager.
Sorry to
Becca.
disappoint. Sorry to
No.
disappoint. Not Yolanda. I know. We're all dying to see her. So hi, hello, hi everyone. My name is Becca Lizarraga. I'm the membership manager for One Tam, and my job is as simple as that. I manage members. So I'm here as one of the resources and one of the connections for you, between you and all of the work that we do, the inner workings of the One Tam world. So let's talk about what's next for Peak Health. How do we, as a community, use this information as a tool to make small changes in our lives as community members? So right now you're able to access the report online at onetam.org/peak-health, onetam.org/peak-health. And we invite you to explore that and learn more about the methodologies, learn more about new indicators. My personal favorites, you can dig deeper on the bees, dig deeper on the bats. So as we're moving forward with this report, we're also thinking about ways to share this information in the most impactful manner. We're working through updating our online and our print materials and just being really intentional about how we can share this information in a way that is helpful to both our partners and our community. Even now, we're already starting to talk about, as we enter our 11th year, we're talking about what the next evolution of Peak Health will look like and what the process will be. So put a little save the date on your calendar for another 5 years for another report. As we move forward and we think more about our findings, we're also thinking about how to integrate all of this information into our public programming so we can get out this information in front of people. We can share with them and really make them feel a part of it, because we are all a part of it. We all have a stake in this. So I know as you're hearing this information and you're feeling what you're feeling and you're thinking, how do I participate? How do I get involved? How can I get involved in protecting the incredible natural communities that the Peak Health Report assessed? And luckily for you, I have 2 ways for you. The first is, congratulations, you're already doing it. You're sharing your time. You're participating in this Peak Health conversation. So that's number 1, is sharing your time. So when you have a moment, check out our calendar on onetam.org for all of the different programs that we have. You can check out our educational programs hosted by our partners. You can look at the volunteer page for opportunities between all of our different agencies. And throughout the year, through the different seasons, there are always opportunities for the community to get involved. That could be something as simple as snapping a picture for the iNaturalist app, or participating in a BioBlitz, or as we mentioned today, we talked about participating in the Marin Wildlife Watch or the Tamalpais Bee Lab, their habitat restoration days. Anything that you're already outside. We know you're already outside. So anything that we can get you out there doing is helpful for us as we gather information about the long-term health of the mountain. This is all on the calendar, so no need to scribble down in your Rolodexes or your pocketbooks. We're coming up over the next couple of weekends. You can catch the Tam Van at Rock Spring, where we'll be talking about forest health and putting our new findings, putting the plan in front of people, and just trying to spread the word and seeing where people can plug in. We also have an upcoming event for One Tam members in July, where we'll be going to Roy's Redwoods to look at some key sites of the revitalization and talking more about the process for how we revitalize the trail network, make it feel more intuitive, but also protecting these really delicate unique ecosystems that surround it. So that all to say, first, how you can get involved, share your time. Second, speaking of members, speaking of your time, you can become a One Tam member to support our work. And I'm always here for you as a resource. If you have any questions, or if you'd like to start a book club where we can read Tending the Wild, I'll be first. You can also stay updated on our work by signing up for our seasonal newsletter. So just to recap, check out our calendar, check out the report, and sign up for our seasonal newsletter so you can hear from us and stay up to date with what we have going on. All right, I will drop my my contact information in the chat. Please let me know if you have any questions about membership or if you need me to point you to someone smarter than me. I hope to see you out there soon. Bye.
Thank you, Becca. I would like to invite Bree, Danny, and Kai back to the screen. We have a few minutes left for questions. Thank you for all the hearts and the thumbs ups, and much appreciated. It's a pleasure being here to talk to you tonight about peak health, climate resilience work, and forest health update. Okay, how about we start with this one? It's from Eva Buxton. Regardless of climate change and all its implications with respect to invasive plants, is early detection rapid response presently working on Mount Tam, and is it doable in the future? Bree, would you like to take that one?
Yes, I definitely can. That's a great question, and I have an emphatic answer, and that is yes, the EDRR program absolutely works. There are many examples, but one great one is cheatgrass on Mount Tam. Cheatgrass is a really difficult grass to control. It's a really difficult grass to identify. So the technical experts on our One Tam team are great at both surveying and identifying it. It was detected in patches that have been being removed. And the success story is that in those patches, we're seeing significant decreases in the number of cheatgrasses. And cheatgrass is something that can really easily move on people's pants as they're traveling on trails. And so our EDRR program is well situated to detect those plants as they could potentially move around and get them before they can more significantly impact other habitats in the park. And then I want to highlight, like, for the future, our EDR program is successful now, but we have also set up the framework we need to keep it relevant for the future. The One Tam partners have collectively developed our priority list for EDRR plants, and we update that. We consider the most current regional data, and we look at and think about detections that are happening in other Bay Area counties as we think about, do we need to add these plants to our lists? And this really allows us to shift our EDRR priority plants as things change. And then I just want to highlight another success of our EDRR program. Each of our partner agencies, does EDRR work as well beyond the One Tam area of focus. And the One Tam EDRR program was so successful that it's actually been expanded statewide in California state parks. And One Tam staff has helped train state parks district staff around the state, helped them to develop their priority EDRR lists, train them on how to implement an EDRR program. So the One Tam EDRR program not just impacts our area, but it is having a positive impact across the state at state parks.
Thank you, Bree. That was a great answer. Next question from Bill Merkel. Hey, Danny. How are you going to be sure that you, Danny, are protecting wildlife, especially bats, spotted owls, and land birds during the Forest Health Project implementation?
I'm going to make Bill do a bunch of overtime. Go check all the places that we're going to do work.
Can we identify who Bill Merkel is?
Yeah, Bill Merkel is the wildlife ecologist with the Golden Gate National Recreation Area National Park Service. Thank you for the good question, Bill. It's a fair question. I think two things really come to mind. The first one is, you're asking about avoidance, and that really relates to environmental compliance. So all of the forest resilience, wildfire resilience work that is going to be advanced by the One Tam land managing agencies goes through the California Environmental Quality Act process, or the National Environmental Policy Act process. That's CEQA or NEPA, right? Those processes, are dependent on the area and who the land manager is and what the resource is and what kinds of treatments are being proposed. And there's a lot of project specific analysis that goes into that. And what comes out of that are mitigations or best management practices or, project specific requirements that are standard for making sure that the work doesn't inadvertently harm all the little critters out there, especially the protected species, like some of the stuff that Bill mentioned, like northern spotted owl. So all that work is still subject to environmental compliance and review, and our partners go through that process, which is highly dependent on who our partners are and what the work is, what the work entails. I have in front of me just a quick smattering of some of the things that Marin Water does as part of their environmental review. They do osprey monitoring. They have a pilot study where they revisit plots every year. They have yellow-legged frog monitoring. They have EDRR, which has been talked about. They do rare plant mapping. So there's just a ton of nesting birds, ground nesting bird surveys, just a ton of surveys that go into making sure that there aren't wildlife impacts. Yes, Carl's listening. Nesting bird surveys, those do happen. You guys can hash it out in the chat with Carl Sanders. He's the guy that knows. Carl Sanders with Marin Water, of course. The second thing that comes to mind, Bill, that I'll just touch on briefly is it's efforts like the Peak Health Report that really help us shape how we are going to adaptively manage forests into the future, right? There's a feedback loop that's created through all of the great monitoring that we've touched on today as part of this webinar. That feedback loop that feeds into how we approach, forestry management and grassland management and shrubland management. And so it's really, the technical answer is really through the environmental compliance process and project review. But the really cool answer is that we are looking at trying to track changes in population dynamics, changes in presence absence through work like the Peak Health Report. And that's going to inform us about how we might be able to tweak our treatments in the future to benefit wildlife. Thanks for the question.
Thank you, Danny. Great response. Bill, you can talk to Danny more if you have any more questions. Last question here from Clint Kellner. Based on your work on the updated 2023 report, is there anything that surprised you? Good question. Lisette, do you want to take that one?
Sure thing. Hi, everybody. I am Lisette Arellano. I am the Senior Program Manager in Conservation and Community Science, and I run the Community Science programs for One Tam. You may know me from Marine Wildlife Watch and also from the Tamalpais Bee Lab. I see a bunch of our volunteers. Hello, I'm so glad you're here. And I think of the things that have surprised me and will always continue to surprise me, no matter how long I think I am a scientist, is how much we don't know. And how much we need to know in order to even just begin to make assertions about trends. For example, it came up earlier, I saw in the chat, like, how come we don't have trends for reptiles and amphibians? We don't as a collective guild, because there is so much, for example, the California giant salamander came up as an example that we don't know. Right. And that was the California giant salamander, for me, was a really great proof of concept of the power of community science. We used crowdsourced observations to get a fine scale map of where they're occurring. The adults are occurring for a lot of people. Those beautiful 6-inch, 2-foot longish salamanders are once in a lifetime experience to see them if you ever do see them. And so to see that we could actually begin to map them out and see where some of their hotspots may be and where some potential levers for conservation exist was really, really exciting. And again, with our work with the Tamalpais Bee Lab, turns out we have close to 400 species of native bees on Mount Tam. And tremendous amount of work that it's taken to get to that point to know that. We are not done with that yet, but it's definitely been just incredible to see the amount of community support that's come out of those projects. Same with Marin Wildlife Watch, being on the cutting edge of using AI, computer vision through the Wildlife Insights platform. And then having all of these really patient, lovely people continue to volunteer with us for close to a decade now. It's just everybody's persistence and just good faith efforts have continued to be just the most incredible surprise, I think. That's really just shows that One Tam is really the friends you make along the way. So yes, that is, I think, for my life.
Thank you, Lisette. Totally agree. We are out of time for questions tonight. It is 8:03, but it's not the last opportunity to talk about these topics. You can always email us at info@onetam.org, and we'll direct you to the right person to answer the question, perhaps even from the chapter author. So keep an eye out on our calendar for future programs. We're looking forward to seeing you out on the mountain soon. Thank you very much and happy solstice.